Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon or teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordelot, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they're decent preachers. All right, let's get started. Peter, where are we in the church year?
We are at Reformation Sunday, a time where the church steps out of the normal routine to remember the work of the reformers in the 16th century as they restored the promise of the gospel as the centerpiece and the goal of Christian preaching and Christian life.
And David, what are the texts for this week?
Well, we've got a lot of them. So
sit down and have a cup of coffee. We're about to hear the text.
I know, right. So if you're going to do the text appointed for Reformation Day, we have Revelation 14, Romans 3, Matthew 11, or John 8, and Psalm 46. If, however, you're going to choose the text for the 20th Sunday after Pentecost, but still perhaps reference the Reformation, then your texts are Genesis 4, 2 Timothy 4, Luke 18, and Psalm 5.
As usual, I ask each of you to tell me which text you would choose to preach about. But instead of asking you a question, I'm going to tell you my Reformation jokes.
Okay,
and if we think it's funny, we get to go first.
That's right. Based on your
so you
response.
can fake the most laugh.
Okay, good.
All right, joke number 1. How do you know that Martin Luther was an organic eater?
How?
He was at the Diet of Worms.
There we go.
No. Okay, all right. How about this one? Did you know that not all reformers were Germans who nailed things on doors?
No.
I didn't know that.
John Knox. Get it? John Knox was a Scottish reformer around the time of Luther.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I get it. He doesn't. Do you?
That's good.
Well, because Peter has been more rude about my jokes than David. David, you get to go first.
Okay, great. I'm going to go with the Genesis text from the 20th Sunday after Pentecost.
And then you can still celebrate Reformation, but just through a different text.
Right, yeah. So that's what I'm hoping to do, is still celebrate the Reformation, but use a different lens because we take a different text. And so the Genesis 4 text is the story of Cain and Abel. And as I approached the text, I was looking at it, and I thought, sometimes I think we read text too quickly. We're reading them like we read stories. We want to get to the end. We want to know what happens, and so we tend to read rather quickly. And I think sometimes if you pause in the middle, you end up discovering things and having a deeper contemplation of what's going on in the story. And so for me, I would like to pause at verse 10. So Cain has already slain Abel, and the Lord has come and has asked Cain where Abel is. And Cain then, responds, I'm not my brother's keeper. And then verse 10 happens. So Jessica, if you could read verse 10.
And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground."
Okay. That is heartbreaking. And it's such an odd thought. So we've got this strange experience of death being something, in this case an unjust death, being something that permeates the world itself and has a voice that still cries out even though the person is gone.
Well, it kind of, sin does that, right? I mean, sin and the damage that it does, the effects of it linger.
Yeah.
It doesn't just, what makes sin such an awful thing is not just that it violates some rule, but it has an ongoing impact. And this is just kind of a really interesting kind of poetic way of putting it, that it's the impact. It's not over when you've done away with the body. That hasn't ended it.
Right.
And that never works that way with sin.
And this is what I think is so interesting is that as readers, we're coming across the death of Abel, and we know all about death. We know all about it. It's not new to us. We, have tried to take care of it by, putting it in hospice centers or hospitals or nursing homes. We know what to do with the body. We have graves. We actually have institutions that perform burials for us. I mean, so we know all about death, and the characters in the story know nothing about it. Nothing. How would they know that that he wasn't just sleeping? Right? I mean, this is the first time they've ever encountered this thing called death. And, the day you eat of it, you shall die was the curse of God. And now they are face to face with death, and it's the first time they're seeing it. So on one hand, we as the readers have a lot more information than Adam and Eve as they're going through this morning. We have a lot more information. But on the other hand, I think if you slow down the reading and you really look at this verse, we discover that our understanding of death is deficient compared to what the Lord is saying about it, the way in which it has these effects, and that this unjust death is going to lead to this voice crying up to heavens. And there's this beautiful painting. I checked on Wikimedia, and it's in the public domain, so you can print it if you want it. But there's this beautiful painting called "The First Morning." So it's by William Adolph Bouguereau. What? M-O-U-R-N. Mourning in terms of M-O-U-R-N.
Mourning as in grieving.
Mourning like in grieving.
Not mourning as in the day.
Hold on, I'm going to look it up on my phone so that I can see it too.
Okay.
While you're looking that up, I really appreciate what you did there, David, in terms of reminding us that when Adam and Eve were told, the day you eat of this, you will die, they didn't know what death was.
No.
Because they hadn't. So we read that back, and we were like, "Oh yeah, that's a serious threat or something."
Right.
But they wouldn't have experienced that.
Here's
what do
the picture.
See? What do you see?
Oh wow! So it looks like it would be Adam and Eve crying over their son.
Adam is sitting there, right?
Yeah, with his son across his lap like the Pieta.
Right.
And
right.
Eve is there crying in Adam's arms. Oh, it's very sad. It's terrible.
And Adam is holding his side, from which Eve came, right? And she is almost trying to crawl back in.
Yeah.
If this is what happens, just let me go back to what it used to be, right? And but the son laid across his lap you're right, in the Pieta form, right? So it's an echo of the Virgin Mary with Jesus across her lap. And if you look at Abel, notice his arms, right?
Yeah.
His face is turned toward heaven, and his arms are in that orans position of prayer, right? So you see Abel interceding, his blood crying out for justice, right? In that, do you see it, Peter?
Yeah, this is a kind of image you could just ponder for a while,
right? And when you think about it being the first time they've ever encountered death. And there's, it's the first morning, so it's a beautiful picture of this statement that his blood is crying from the ground, and it's crying for vengeance. It reminds you of that text from Hebrews 12:24. Jessica, if you could read that.
And to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel.
And so I think that painting helps us see the typology, where Jesus is equal to but greater than Abel. That Abel's blood it's an unjust death, and that unjust death is crying out. But Abel's blood cried out for vengeance, for God to avenge his death. And in Jesus Christ, we have an unjust death. And his unjust death, just like Abel's unjust death, cries out, but his death cries out for forgiveness. And through his death, God grants forgiveness. And so this is the kind of where I would make the Reformation tie-in, right, is that the Reformation is that time when the church focuses its attention fully and squarely on the redemptive work of Christ and the way in which his unjust death cries out for forgiveness. And not only that, but the Reformation then turns its attention to say that it's not just the blood of Jesus from the ground crying out. This Jesus has been raised from the dead. He's ascended into heaven, and he sent his Holy Spirit to preachers and people for them to cry out for the forgiveness of sins. So that's kind of how I would probably move with the sermon.
Well, this would also invite you to emphasize the resurrection too, in the sense that, that picture especially is so vivid of Abel, just they're dead.
Right.
And that's the result of sin. But with the forgiveness, then comes life. And you've got Jesus was also in that position, the Pietà, but then he rises from the dead.
Right.
And that leads to this new life, this Reformation, joyful
and there will be a day
celebration.
when we no longer need tombs.
Right.
Right. Then all of the apparatuses we have built for death don't need them anymore, because God will raise all the dead. And those who believe in Jesus Christ will be brought into eternal life in a new kingdom.
To be one who celebrates the Reformation then is to live into that truth and to trust in and already live the new life that God has given us as we've been united with him in our baptism. So I think this leads to a new life of joy and sharing and speaking.
And now it's time for the Ask Jessica jar, the part of the show where we pick a question from the jar and I answer it from the perspective of a person in the pew. All right, David, pick a question. Pick a Reformation-y question.
Okay. What are some questions I could ask parishioners as I plan this sermon?
It would be interesting if during Bible study the week before you had that amazing painting and you'd ask them to write down a few of their responses.
Oh, yeah. Nice. And so as you talked about it, you could say, here's what different people see in this, and here's how it affects people.
Right.
That's a great idea.
That would be
great. That's really a good idea, because that gets people, it gives you a way to plan your sermon partially around where your hearers are seeing and thinking about things. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Good.
Peter, what about you? What would you preach about?
I noticed the Luke 18 text, I think, really pairs nicely with Reformation. And so I'm going to look at the Luke 18, verses 9 to 17. And let me just preface this with a couple of observations about the Reformation. So it is the kind of thing a lot of congregations like to remember Luther and think about Luther and the Reformation on this day in the church year, and that's a fine thing. One of maybe the primary reason, even I might say, that I think we rightly remember Luther and the Reformation is that Luther understood what it means to be righteous. That was one of his great contributions. That how do we become righteous? What does it mean to be righteous? Or this righteousness through faith that we talk so much about. Luther's contribution here is really significant, and so I'm going to little preview here. I'm going to suggest that the listeners to this podcast, David suggested something to look at. I'm going to suggest 3 things to either read or listen to in preparation for this sermon. One of them would be Luther's preface to his Galatians commentary. Now, in his preface to his Galatians commentary, this is 1535, toward the end of his life, he writes about righteousness, and it's just like 8 pages. It's in Luther's Works, the American edition, volume 26, I think, or 27, one of the two. But there he lays out that to be righteous is to be related rightly, to be rightly related. So with respect to God, to be righteous is to be in a right relationship with God. To be righteous with relationship to one another, we're in the right relationship with each other. This is a different view of righteousness than thinking about attaining some sort of moral perfection or following some legal code. And I think that's actually really significant for this parable, because in the parable there's someone who follows the righteous code, but they're not right with God. And because they're not right with God, they're not right with others. So First thing to read, the preface to Luther's Galatians commentary. And that leads us to the text. And Jessica, I'm going to ask if you'd read verse 9 to get us started.
He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt.
All right, again, this is one of these parables where Luke is very clear about who is Jesus talking to. Well, he's talking to those who trusted in themselves, that they trusted in themselves that they were right with God. And as a result, then they looked down their long nose at others, which reminded me of our favorite author, which we've been talking about recently, it seems like, on a number of podcasts, and that is Flannery O'Connor, right?
It's true.
We were just talking about her before
Yes.
the recording today. I mentioned that since I listened to that podcast, Jessica, that you guys had together.
Yes, that was Tangible Theology Learned and Lived. I talked with David about the author of Flannery O'Connor. Check it out.
So I did check it out, and I've been listening to short stories of Flannery O'Connor recently, and not long ago I listened to Revelation.
Wow, I love that one. Oh,
well, what do you love about it?
I love the humor of it, and I love the closing scene. So
Yes,
Okay.
so much.
Okay, well, I'm not going to summarize it or spoil it, but I will point out that read this parable and then read about Mrs. Turpin and see if you see some similarities between the Pharisee in the parable and Mrs. Turpin, who is, she's part of the good Christian folk. She is kind of embodying the kind of mindset that then shows up in the waiting room. And it's a similar mindset that the Pharisee in the parable has. The Pharisee in the parable is just looking down his long nose at others and thinking about his own performance with respect to God and how that makes him righteous. And so, since I brought it up, would you read verses 10 to 12, Jessica, about the Pharisee?
2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, and even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes on all I get.
So the Pharisee, it's interesting, he's not bragging to others in this parable. He's not talking to others about how wonderful he is. In some way, he's self-aware enough not to do that. But even worse, he brings before God. You know, he's suggesting to God that he's not as bad as these others. His faithfulness, both in the way he lives and in the way he worships, kind of talking about his tithes there. He gives everything he does. He fasts. So his lifestyle and his worship life, he thinks that makes him right with God. And that leads him then to pray that way. Which brings us back to the Reformation. The whole thing about righteousness, the great recovery that Luther had in the Reformation, was that we are right with God not through our actions, not through our worship, not through anything that we do. We are right with God through faith, through trust, through confidence, not in ourselves, but only in the promise of Jesus. Now, when I was thinking about this, Jessica, I thought of another Tangible podcast.
Awesome.
Can you guess which one?
Which episode? Faith Alone?
The one
with
that you did
Dr.
with
Kolb
Okamoto and Kolb.
Yes, awesome.
About
Awesome.
faith alone, we really mean it.
Yeah.
And they reflected on this reality that even good Lutherans, even good seminarians, come here and think sometimes we can, in our heads, say, oh yeah, we're saved by grace through faith. But when we actually look at what does that look like in our lives and how do we live that out, I listened to it again this morning, actually. So the question is, what does it look like? What does it sound like to really live by faith or to trust in justification by faith? And the short answer is, it doesn't look like the Pharisee. It doesn't look like Mrs. Turpin. Mm-hmm. It looks like this tax collector. And so would you read verse 13, Jessica?
But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner.
He doesn't flaunt anything he has before God. He doesn't esteem his orthodoxy or his piety or his superiority to others, his sanctification. He doesn't bring that before God. He actually realizes he has nothing. And when you realize you have nothing, then the promise of the gospel becomes the best news in the history of the world, because then you realize God gives everything to those who have nothing. And so I would want to celebrate the Reformation this Sunday by helping the congregation realize ways in which the sneaky ways in which our sinful nature lead us to think like the Pharisee or like Mrs. Turpin in the Revelation story. And in doing so, expose the self-righteousness that I think we could say lurks in probably every Christian heart. And I know it does in mine. In a way, you'd be holding up this parable and or that short story like a mirror to yourself, first of all, and then to the congregation.
That's good, because when I read the stories of Jesus' followers and the Pharisees, it's so easy to be on team disciples, but really I'm more like the Pharisee. They were good church workers. They were good church goers. They were like us in a lot of ways. They were studying God's word. They were trying to do what was right. We want to be like Team Jesus, like the disciples, but really I think I need to put myself there more often.
Yeah, I mean, the sinful nature really does cling, and it sneaks up on us. I mean, you go back to that short story from Flannery O'Connor, and that gal in the waiting room she really thinks she's right and she's doing things properly, and she's very kind of the lurking and the devilish ways in which pride kind of seeps from the inside out. I think is what needs to be addressed on occasion, and this is maybe a good week to do it.
Yeah, and then at the end of the thing, when she sees that vision, I think one of the last lines is something like, even their virtues were being burned away.
Yeah.
Well, and this is where I think, the danger in a sermon like this, not danger, but you just want to be, you got to preach the gospel every Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
And especially on Reformation Sunday. And so you'd want to make sure you don't leave people with Mrs. Turpin.
No.
And you don't leave people with the Pharisees. You help them see how much they're like the tax collector, and then you preach the promise of God.
You leave
that
them
gives
with God.
life.
Yes.
If I'm thinking about talking to preachers who are going to preach on Reformation, one of the most helpful things I think you can do is remember what the Reformation was all about to begin with. The gospel and what that means, and then you bring that to the hearers.
It's time for the Ask Jessica jar. Peter, pick a question.
The question I drew was, what questions might be left after this sermon?
I think if you're going to reference that short story, it would be a really great idea for some people to have read it. So maybe in Bible study the week ahead, if you are new to that author, she is very explosive in how she writes, and her narratives all have a second meaning. So the narrative itself can seem pretty intense, because that's the kind of author that she is, and you have to know that ahead of time. But reading that story would add so much to your sermon. So maybe encouraging people to read it ahead of time before a Bible study, or even after.
And even if you don't reference it in the sermon at all, I think it would be it'd be worth an hour of your time this week to read it yourself as a preacher, and then and just let that soak in, kind of how that Mrs. Turpin kind of sneaks up on all of us.
Mm-hmm. Again, as you read it, she uses inappropriate thoughts and words about African Americans that you can see through, that are there because to make the point that they're wrong. But if you read it without knowing that, it could sound like it's being disrespectful.
That's
right.
good. No, that's good.
You're right. You're right.
I do want our listeners to know we did not talk ahead of time at all about promoting the other podcasts or anything like that. Peter just mentioned them, and I was surprised, pleasantly so. Thanks, Peter. That's all for today. We have free resources to guide your next step in planning at concordiatheology.org. Check it out. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordelot. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart, when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Navsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday. Were they kind of funny? A little bit funny, the second one? John Knox?
The second one was fun.
It was kind of funny.